My name is Maury. I put this out as a primer for Avalanche education, for if any of y'all are looking at taking an Avalanche education level one course, or if you've taken a level one as a refresher, going into sort of the meat of the Avalanche season, depending on what area you're in. So this is not intended to replace an Avalanche level one or hands-on with like rescue. It's intended to be a primer so that you can pay more attention to the hands-on portions whenever you go to those classes, or so that you can re-remember and maybe learn some new things that might have been missed in Avalanche education you may have already seen or taken. So I'm going to start sharing a screen. All right, so y'all should be able to now see a full screen, planning around avalanche terrain, uh, slide deck. Just let me know if any of the things I say don't show or the slide deck doesn't progress as I talk through it. So, planning around avalanche terrain starts by being able to identify it, and you can see that some avalanches can be really small and some can be really big. This one in the picture, that's the background, is one that was taken in the Mammoth area 2 years ago. That was about a 10-foot crown where the avalanche slid. So some of them can be really big and really scary, and then some are very manageable. And this class is intended to introduce the tools and some of the ways of thinking about avalanche things as we go. So first, like the whole point of understanding avalanches is so that we can make a plan, but no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And so we need to be able to also make decisions to adjust that plan once we have made it. And taking observations once we're out in the field is one of the biggest way we do that. Where in the military, the enemy is obviously shooting at you, and that's my background. But the enemy in the mountains is often going to be reality. Sometimes the other people around you. All right, so my background, I've spent 14 years in the military, 10 as an infantry officer, have trained formations up to 160 soldiers in mountain warfare, and then had to develop some mountain warfare training for the 10th Mountain Division's Light Fighter School and a few infantry companies. Recreationally, I'm an avalanche professional working as a ski guide and avalanche instructor for Aries curriculum. And then I teach mountain navigation courses through my platform, Tactical Alpinism, which is where the majority of y'all probably found this. Bottom line of Tactical Alpinism is to enable y'all and people to go bigger in the mountains with more confidence, so that you know going in that you have a little bit larger margin than you may have otherwise had. Ultimate purpose of this class is to build safety, speed, and confidence in the mountains. The outcomes are to one, identify avalanche terrain, two, identify the avalanche problems, three, expand on the understanding of like when to enter and when to avoid avalanche terrain, and four, provide resources for additional learning and training places you can go. The biggest thing as a recreational user in the mountains that we need to understand is our major tool for avalanches, planning around them, dealing with them is avoidance. In order to avoid them, we have to understand what they are and why they occur. So to rewind over a decade to when I first took an Avalanche level one course, I was 21 years old in Colorado. This picture's taken in Guanella Pass, where that arrow is pointing the day after I finished my Avalanche level one course. I skinned up on my skis. I dug a snow pit to look at the snow. It was like, oh, that looks scary. I'm not going to ski this. I go up on that ridge line, a little bit out of sight along the skyline, skin across, and then ski down in the trees. What you'll notice in this picture is that an avalanche has occurred. This picture was taken the next day. So overnight or after I had left for the day, this avalanche slid. Notice that I was standing or I dug the pit in a area that I thought was safe, but it slid because of the avalanche problem that I didn't fully understand. So the as I have been going through learning more about avalanches and the way that they happen, I've realized more and more that that day was when I thought I knew the most compared to where I'm at now. And it's always learning. Giving these classes is part of my professional development so that I can continue to learn and provide a better class for people that I may end up teaching in the future. But bottom line is like I continue to find ways to learn, including teaching. Okay, so part one, like what is avalanche terrain? So there are three things that are required for any avalanche to occur. The first is a steep enough slope, second is unstable snow, and the third is a trigger. So what is a steep enough slope? Any slope from 30 to 45 degrees is steep enough to avalanche. Any slope over 30 degrees is steep enough to avalanche. Under 30 degrees, it's usually too shallow to slide. There are some rare circumstances that are typically noted in forecasts when something below 30 degrees could slide, and I'll get into some of the caveats about that a little bit later. Once you get over 45 degrees, again, you can have an avalanche, but it usually slides before accumulating. That would be often what you might see in Alaska ski films where you have sloughs. Those are technically avalanches. They are a type of an avalanche, but it usually slides before accumulating to a point where it could bury a person. The second piece to this is you could be like in the image on the right where A, B, and C are, you could be well out of avalanche terrain or terrain that is steep enough to avalanche, I should say. But the run out where the avalanche debris can go to can still reach you. So you need to know what's above you as well in order to identify what is an area of relative safety. Another example is that point that I was at in the previous picture at the start of this. That was an area that was lower angle, but the avalanche problem had propagated around that terrain feature and took it as well. So there's a lot of it depends and starting to gain just experience in the mountains that is the most valuable part of this once you have this base understanding. So reading slope angle. There's a few ways to do it. First is before you go, so you're planning, you use your slope shading apps and tools that you find in navigation apps. For example, like Caltopa, or you might have seen advertisements for Onyx. All those apps, and I'll pull up some images a little bit later, show slope angle shading. Second is current knowledge. So a blue run is often going to be about 25 or so degrees. A black run is going to be somewhere between 25 and 30. Once you get into 35, 40, now we're talking really steep double black runs. And you might hear people talk about like a 50-degree run. Well, if you're on a 50-degree run, that is really freaking steep. Most people never see something that steep. It is steep enough that typically your hip is just about against the snow. So just one is that planning. Second is use what you know. And like a blue run, 25-ish, black run, 30, 35. So, and think of some of the steepest runs you see in resorts. Most resort runs will not go above mid 30s. Finally, you have your field measuring techniques, and you want to use tools in order to tune your eye to it. Because if you look down at the note at the bottom of 2 stars, professionals using a tool, using an inclinometer either on their phone or on a compass or some other inclinometer tool to measure the slope had a 3-degree error. So If you want to be absolutely certain we're out of avalanche terrain when using a tool, you want if you measure 27, you could absolutely be in avalanche terrain still. And then without tools, professionals had a 6 degree error. So if we're not professionals, we want to make sure that if we're uncertain about a slope angle, we want to measure it. And the way you do that, it like one easy example that all of us carry is you have the measurement or measuring app that's on iPhones and most Androids, and that has a level in it. When you put it up against a slope, you can hold it and it'll tell you what the angle is that you're looking across the slope at. You can also look up slope doing that, or you can, if you're standing on a slope, you can put it down at your feet and measure the angle of the slope that you're on. So we've talked about steep enough slope. Bottom line to take away is 30 to 45-degree slopes can slide. And now we're talking about unstable snow. So bottom line is we have strong snow over weak snow or dense snow over soft. If you've ever shoveled, you've probably felt the difference between that really heavy wet snow in your driveway, that's stronger snow, and the really light, fluffy, soft snow. That is an example of weaker snow. All right. And when it's right side up, that's going to be a storm that comes in warm and wet and then cools down as the storm progresses, where the snow gets lighter, fluffier, less dense. A storm that comes in upside down is one that goes cold to warm, or is a warm storm that comes in after a really cold, dry spell, where we're getting some of that sugary snow building in the snow. If you look on the right, you can see some layering in the snow, and you'll see some tongue depressor popsicle sticks. Each of those identify a layer in the snow. If you look down towards the bottom, where you have the purple and then the orange tongue depressor, the last two ones all the way down towards the bottom, you can see that look that's a distinctly darker band. That's an ice band. If you look towards the right of the image, where the purple layer cake looking thing is, that's the layer that's about 80 centimeters down from the surface. The purple bars, as they get longer, are denser or stronger snow. And so now we can start to see what some softer or less dense snow and some denser or harder snow looks like. Looking all the way at the top of that purple uh, chart, you can see that there's a really soft layer right at the very top with a super thin, slightly harder layer over top. That's not a problem, even though it's weak snow or not dense snow. It's not a problem until it gets buried. Once weak layers are buried, then they become a problem. The third thing we need is a trigger. A trigger is any increase in load in the snowpack. You can have both natural and human or man-made triggers. Examples are new snow load. So a storm can deposit snow. Even more so would be wind. Wind can move snow 10 to 12 times faster than it just falling due to a storm. You have your natural, you have a cornice fall, where that adds a lot more load to the snow than just new snow. A cornice is a big wind-loaded feature, and 1 cubic meter of ice is 1,000 kilograms or 2,000, just over 2,000 pounds. So 1 cubic meter of densely packed corniced snow that falls adds a massive load to the snowpack. The other one that might be a little bit less usual would be water. So if we have a rain event or we just have warming where the temperature all of a sudden gets warmer, that's now increasing the load because the snow is getting more dense and compacting while also lubricating the snow with that water running through, decreasing friction. So water can also increase the load on the snowpack. We then have our human triggers, which can be us, snowmobiles, or explosives. If you go to a resort out west that has a lot of avalanche control, you'll probably hear the explosives going off. And one thing I'm going to pause for is if any of y'all have questions we go through, please drop them in the chat. I'm going to get to the questions at the end, and I'll just go through them in the order that they come in. But I'm going to keep moving through the slide deck, and then I'll come back to your questions when we hit the end. So once we get away from triggers, then we have trigger points. Generally, trigger points are areas where it's easier to trigger an avalanche, and their area is where it is going to be shallower. The snow is shallower, or under more tension. Shallow areas are where there's rocks that are buried. You might not be able to see them under the snow. You could have buried trees. You could have exposed rocks and trees. And then you have convex rolls. Convex roll being the image that's depicted on the slide, both on the left side and the right. And a convex roll could be a shallower area, but it could also just be an area where the snowpack is under more tension. Think folding a Snickers bar where the top of the Snickers bars will come under more tension and then start to crack. That's what's happening in the snow there. So you're more likely to trigger an avalanche on a convexity where the slope goes from less steep to more steep. That's the one you can most readily see, whereas your buried rocks and trees are going to be a little bit harder to see as far as where there are trigger points. If you take nothing else away from this class, take away these red flags. And these are something that Jones Snowboards hits a lot, and Jeremy Jones hits a lot in his videos. Um, these are the things that are considered like class one or top tier data. Whereas if you are seeing these, conditions are very unstable or rapidly changing. So first you have strong wind. I'm going to go through the simpler ones first and then talk some of the ones that are a little bit more nuanced. So first you have strong winds, new snow, and recent avalanches. If you see an avalanche occur naturally, you know that there are unstable conditions. The most unstable conditions are the ones where avalanches occur naturally, where you don't need a human to touch them, you don't need something to fall. They just occur because the snow is like a domino, a pile of dominoes where it's just ready to go. One thing tips and the whole thing goes. New snow and strong winds can contribute to that loading and give that additional push that those dominoes need. Warming decreases bonds in the snowpack, making it weaker. But then when it refreezes, it gets stronger. So the rapid warming, which can also be rain because you're adding a lot of warmth to the snowpack, is a big red flag and a good idea to stay away from the terrain that is warming. However, warming is a unique one because in most circumstances, a lot of our warming is going to be solar or from the sun. South facing slopes get the most sun and are at an angle where they receive the most solar input. And so either we can avoid south slopes and go to more northerly slopes, or we can go with timing. If we're going to ski a south slope, then we start earlier before it thaws and before it warms up. And then that rapid warming, we've avoided it through our timing. Finally, we have cracking and whoomphing. And this is as you're walking over the snow, you hear or you feel a whoomph or a failure in the snow. You can see cracks shooting away from the tips of your skis. There are some really cool videos that you might see because you've been thinking about avalanches. Now that we're talking about it, you might see them pop up on your Instagram or your social media now, where like you'll see just a cascade of ripples going away from a person as one of these whoomphs happens. That is a massive failure in the snowpack, and that is a indicator of incredibly unstable conditions. Okay, so we've talked the red flags, we've talked our three ingredients to get to an avalanche. Now we're going to hit our avalanche problems, and this is how our avalanche centers are going to communicate to us. In order to understand the avalanche problems, we need to get the avalanche forecast. And here, uh, linked avalanche.org. If you don't know what your actual nearest avalanche center is, you can go to avalanche.org and it has listed out all of the avalanche centers in the United States. If you're going to a new area to you, you can find what the nearest avalanche center is to that zone. So avalanche.org is a great resource. On the right side, you can see a slew of different avalanche centers. The one we're going to dive into for the next little bit is the Sierra Avalanche Center. I'm going to transition to that page. Alrighty, so you should see the Sierra Avalanche Center up on the screen. And this is the home page for any Avalanche Center. They're going to be generally the same and have generally the same information. They're all going to navigate a little bit differently. The main ones that you see in the US is you have NWAC, Northwestern Avalanche Center. For those of you in the Pacific Northwest, you have CAIC, Colorado Avalanche Information Center out of Colorado. And then you have Sierra Avalanche Center in the Sierra Nevada in California and Nevada. And then you'll have a series of other avalanche centers, Idaho, anywhere that has a significant recreation in the mountains has some sort of avalanche center more than likely. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to come over to the forecast. And a lot of these avalanche centers will have a education portion so we can understand what this forecast says. So anytime we get the forecast, we'll see that this was the forecast issued for today, January 23rd, and it expires at the end of today because they'll issue a new one every single day that they're out. Then you'll have the bottom line, which if you read nothing else, take that bottom line away. And this will change as we go into more hazardous days where there are going to be more specific problems. Right now in the Sierra, it's a pretty simple problem. It's avalanches remain unlikely, is the takeaway. The main hazard where in the Sierra right now is a long sliding fall from that cooling, warming, making a nice slick, icy slope across much of the areas. So not really an avalanche hazard to be concerned about. But if we go back a few weeks, then we do get to some avalanche problems. When you're reading the avalanche danger, you'll see it marked out as above tree line, near tree line, and below tree line. Different forecasting centers will break this out a little bit differently, and tree line changes depending on region. So check your avalanche center to know where those lines actually are. In Utah, they actually outline it by just elevation bands, and they say below 8,000, 8,000 to 9,000, 10,000 and above, or something like that for their bands. The second bit you have is your triangle that just with colors that depicts that near, above, and below tree line. And then we have our actual hazard rating. So now to go into the danger scale, we'll zoom it in on the danger scale for a second. So we have a low, moderate, considerable, high, and extreme. And you'll see that it goes 1 through 5. That's a little bit misleading because this scale is actually exponential. So it's more accurate to say that 1 is low, 2 is moderate, 4 is considerable, 8 is high, and so on. Or it might even be steeper than that. But the hazard increases significantly as you go from one level to the next, going up the scale. You can read under the danger scale what the travel advice is, the likelihood of avalanches, and the avalanche size and distribution. Obviously, larger avalanches are going to be scarier because they can do more damage to you. 1 second. Had a phone call come in that stopped the screen sharing. So the higher we go up the danger scale, the more significant the danger becomes, the larger the size becomes, and the more likely it is to get natural avalanches from above you. And so now we're going to dive into a forecast in the Sierra that was a little bit higher hazard. And so now I've moved back to January 3rd here in the Sierra. The bottom line, quick but potent storm is expected today, leading to a rapid increase in avalanche danger this afternoon. High intensity snowfall and gale force winds are expected to create areas of unstable snow, especially near ridgetops, gullies, and on open slopes that are rapidly filled in with wind drifted snow. A transition from stable conditions to avalanches may happen over a short period of time today. So, key takeaways for me from that is we have new snowfall and we have strong winds, gale force winds. And then that transition will happen rapidly. As we look down here at our avalanche danger for our above tree line, our near tree line, our below tree line, you'll see that the avalanche danger is elevated above and near tree line. That's because the first problem that they are talking about is a wind problem where we have those gale force winds. The second problem is that new storm snow. We will can see an increase from new storm snow below tree line, but you won't generally, unless the winds are incredibly strong, see an increase in wind problems below tree line. Now, where do we go to look at all of the different forecast problems? Well, we're going to have in the education section for each avalanche center some sort of description of these different avalanche problems. If you take an avalanche level 1 course, you'll get a book that has these descriptions typically in the back of it as well. So our first problem is and I'm going to categorize these problems in a few ways. So first we have loose avalanches and slab avalanches. Loose avalanches are generally smaller because they point release from like where your feet are or where something falls. Slab avalanches are generally going to be bigger because a crack can propagate or move around a large area and take more snow with it. So, a dry loose is like that slough that I talked about at the beginning of this lesson, where you have a little bit of snow that's going to run down a steep slope. It's not really connected together. It's not usually a problem unless it catches you or takes you off your feet, which it can do in consequential terrain, being an area over a cliff, for example. Then you have our storm slab, which is where there's new snow falling. It's generally pretty even across all aspects north, south, east, west. It doesn't really matter where it lands, it's going to evenly coat the area. We have a wind slab avalanche. Wind slabs form where you have wind blowing from one direction to the other. So, where the wind is coming from, that is your windward side. In the Sierra, the prevailing wind is often a southwest wind. So it's coming from the southwest, and that's how you'll see it in the forecast. And so it will deposit snow on those northeast and north aspects. Cornices are another wind related problem where cornices are going to build and get bigger as a result of wind. When we see warming, that can cause cornices to fall, or when we see increase in their size, that can cause cornices to fall. Now we're going to get to a few of our bigger problem avalanche types. So we have our persistent slab, our deep persistent slab, and our wet slab. And then we'll have towards the bottom, glide. So if you see persistent slab, deep persistent slab, glide, or wet slab, those are all problems that you want to be like very much on edge about. They are very uncertain and you can't see them changing on the surface. For all the ones where it's warming, like wet loose or storm or wind, we can see those changing on the surface. If you see persistent or you see wet slab or you see glide, you want to give those an incredibly wide berth and be very conservative. You can have a persistent slab problem when it's a moderate avalanche danger. And generally, you'll hear, like in Colorado, you'll have persistent slab like most of the winter, and that'll be a moderate problem many times. But that's often referred to as a scary moderate because the only way to manage those is by completely avoiding the terrain that they are in. So now what does looking at those problems in a forecast look like? So here we have problem one is a wind slab, and this is in the Sierra, and you'll have your problem one, and then you'll have a problem two. So for this day, it was a dry loose is problem two, and a wind slab is problem one. So you'll notice, as I mentioned, the Sierra has a prevailing wind that is typically from the southwest, meaning that where the problem is here on this aspect and elevation is on those more northerly slopes and easterly slopes is where this problem is coming from. Because as the wind blows from the bottom left to the top right, the snow is getting deposited in those top right aspects. The way you can tell this is the way you can tell what your aspect is by using either a mapping app or a compass while you're out in terrain. And then third is where the sun is. The sun, if you can see it, is generally south-ish and it rises in the east and sets in the west. So if you're in the morning, it's going to be in the southeast. And if it's in the afternoon, it's going to be in the southwest. If it's midday, it's going to be pretty much due south. So that's a quick way to judge what aspect you're on. Next, you're gonna have likelihood, whereas like certain would be it's definitely gonna happen. You'll see natural avalanches occurring. Likely would be you probably need some sort of input, whether it be a cornice fall or a human. Possible, definitely need some sort of larger input. Unlikely, probably not gonna happen. Now we get over to size, and we'll go from small, which is D1, and a D1 being one that can knock a person off their feet. D2 is an avalanche size that can bury and injure a person. D3 can bury a car, and D4 to 5 can take out trees. And 5 would be a historic sized avalanche. D4 would be pretty darn big, but they can take out trees, they can take out trucks, they can take out a railroad track, etc. Like D4 and 5, if those are predicted, stay well away from avalanche terrain. When we get to dry loose, you'll now see size wise that you're only seeing that down here at the D1 size. It's possible, and then our aspect and elevation, we're seeing it down at lower elevations because that's where the wind, because we have our gale force winds, the wind is not affecting the snow. And this particular storm came in cold enough that it wasn't forming any sort of slab, so we didn't get a storm slab problem that day. To go into it a little bit more, at the very bottom, you'll have your forecast discussion. And that's where you can get a little bit more information about some of our elevations and other reasons why this forecast is forecasted the way it is. Okay. The next tool that is very valuable in knowing where avalanches are occurring and how they're occurring is our observations. And for our observations page on any of the avalanche sites, this is a great way to know where avalanches have been seen by the public or professional forecasters in the recent time. We can also go into a visual version where it's going to tell us where these different avalanches have been occurring. So I can pick a date. So Pat, I'm going to go for the past month. Okay, and then boom, now we have a few avalanches. And so now we can see zone all in the Sierra Nevada because this is one zone, whereas Colorado will have multiple zones. We have trigger, human versus natural. So we have in the past month 3 human and 10 naturally triggered avalanches. We've had 5D1 and 8D2. And then we have our spatial distribution. So with the problems that we've been seeing here in the Sierra, and then looking at that forecast we just looked at, you can see that our avalanches, and this is kind of a heat map, are all happening on north and east aspects in the past month. Now, how do I use this information? If I am going into a zone that is new to me, I'm going to go look at the last month's worth of data to see how things have changed over that season. Because every single area is going to be different. I live in Reno, Nevada, and if I drive 3 hours down to Mammoth, the snow is going to be different down there. So I'd look at their avalanche forecast center instead of just mine up here in the Sierra. So lots of information so far, and that's why I'm recording it so y'all can go back and review this as many times as you want. So we've hit the forecast, we've hit the danger scale, and we've hit the avalanche problems. If you take nothing else away about the avalanche problems, I want you to take away that there are surface problems and then there are subsurface problems. Our surface problems are ones like wind and storm. Those are the ones that we can see. We can see them changing. Our subsurface problems are the ones we cannot see and we cannot assess without digging into the snow. Those are our persistent slabs, our wet slabs, and our glide avalanches. Those are the ones that are scary, and you just want to avoid the terrain that they're going to be in if that is the problem that you are dealing with. So now we're going to get into the planning portion, and I'll hit this for about 5 to 8 minutes before we go into questions and wrap up. Okay, so first is terrain consequence. The consequence of the terrain needs to affect your decision to enter that terrain. The types of terrain that increase consequence are things that would make it more likely for us to get buried deeply or to get more significantly injured. So cliffs, if we fall off a cliff, we're going to get more injured. A small avalanche can make a cliff a big deal. Or a cliff, should say, can make a small avalanche a big deal. Gullies and rivers, road cuts, and crevasses are all pieces of terrain where snow can accumulate more deeply. And as a result, you can get buried deeper. Therefore, the consequence is higher. It takes a lot of time to move a little bit of snow. If you've ever dug through really wet snow in a driveway, you know how heavy that can get. Now imagine compressing that snow as it's been moving downhill, and it's going to be a bunch of like essentially ice blocks. It takes a lot of time to move even 1 meter of snow to get to a person that's underneath. So, terrain consequence needs to be at the forefront of your mind when selecting terrain. Is there a gully or is there a river below you that you could be swept into when you're skiing or riding? Are there trees that you'll take a slide for life into? Those increase your consequence. So now we're going to just talk some areas that we could go into depending on the hazard. And first, you'll see at the bottom that we have slope angle shading. And we have 27 is yellow, and then up into our orange and red is our 30s and 35s. So 27's on here very intentionally. And if you remember back to using measurement tools, how there's a plus or minus 3% or a 3-degree error, that yellow's on here because that is our some of our margin for error. I'm not going to say all of it, it's some of it. The second piece of error that comes in is when you're looking at a map like this, the contours can be 10 meters apart, they can be 5 meters apart, they can be 40 feet apart. A steeper slope can hide between contour intervals. So know that slope shading is awesome and it's good, but it is not perfect. So you have to use it to plan and then make sure your plan makes sense once you get out on the field and you're confronting that enemy or our reality. So if we're looking at a high hazard day with a storm slab problem and a wind slab problem, let's say just like that forecast we looked like from January 3rd, where we have high winds up high and new snow with a dry loose problem down low. I can now select what zones I'm going to go into. You can see where tree line is a little bit on this image. It's about where my mouse is now, right at towards the top of zone one, or towards the left side, I should say, of zone one, and then the bottom of zone two, the blue zone. That's about where our tree line is in this. So if we're talking moderate dry loose problem only below tree line, and then strong gale force winds up high, then if I see that in the forecast, I'm going to go for zone one and maybe zone two, depending on what I see in zone one. Because zone one is less than 30 degrees. It is not where that wind problem is. And the only thing I'm going to have to deal with is dry, loose snow. And I'm not an avalanche terrain for the most part in zone one. As I'm moving up through zone one, I can assess how is the snow doing? Is it moving a bunch? Is it forming a slab? Is it staying nice, fluffy, and it hippie pow? Then maybe I can go into zone two with that forecast. If we're going back to the forecast that I initially pulled up where it's normal conditions and normal caution, no avalanche hazard, then maybe we're considering going into zone four, zone three, and zone five, where the avalanche hazard is low and we have been seeing like a lot of warming, a lot of cooling, and like the only problem is might be a slide for life. Now my decision making is less about the avalanche hazard, still a consideration, and it's more about where's the good skiing, where's the best skiing, and like where are my other hazards. So for example, if you look at the left side of zone 5, you can see some purple and some black. That indicates cliffs, and cliffs can absolutely be a hazard if there's snow or ice on them and sun's hitting them. So, do I want to be in that zone if it's going to be a really warm day? Probably not, or maybe not for that long, because we have some now non-avalanche hazards that we have to deal with. Whereas if we have zone four here, where it's a south-facing slope, we have a warmer day. Maybe we go up there to ski some nice soft snow on the way down as it's warmed up. So there's a lot of it depends, and you really have to pay attention to the forecast and the weather for the day to make these decisions. So looking at that zone that we just looked at, and now we've zoomed in on zone two down here where checkpoint two is, and zone five where it says Coke Shoot is. Here is a plan that I made to ski a few years ago. And you can see on the top left side what it looks like looking up from checkpoint four or CP4 into that area. And so I'm going to talk through what this planning process looked like so that you can then go replicate the planning process on your own. Avalanche problem wise, we had no avalanche problems. There's a low avalanche forecast. There was just some potential for dry loose down low in the trees because it had been cold and been a little windy up top, but there was no wind slab problem at this time based on the way that the conditions had developed over the season. It was going to be a warmer day, about 45 degrees for the high at 9,000 feet. The top of the cliffs that you see in the image are about 11,000 feet, a little bit over 11,000 feet. So probably still above freezing. And you can see those cliffs are right in the sun. So our plan was to leave from checkpoint one or CP1 in the top right of the screen, follow the red line through checkpoint two, checkpoint three, and checkpoint four. Checkpoint four was our key decision point. We were going to decide what direction we are going to go as a result of the hazard and the problems that we are seeing. In this day, we did not have any avalanche problems to deal with, but we did have a timing problem because of the temperature. As you can see in the photo of this bowl, those cliffs have some snow on them and are in the sun. That means that that dark rock is going to be warming up and releasing rock, or could release rock, snow, ice, etc. So, one of my hazard mitigations for this day is it still cold enough when we get up there to prevent that thawing that would cause things to fall down on us? The second is, do I want to climb up there and be in that gun barrel of those things falling down for a long period of time that it takes me to climb up the 2,000 feet in that chute where I don't really have much of anywhere to go? Or do I want to go around following my alternate route up the purple line or my tertiary route or contingency route of the green line? That's going to be an individual decision based on the conditions and the communication you have within your team. It ended up being cold enough and we were early enough that we chose to go up the chute in this case. But if it was a warmer day, we would have gone around because I can ski down that chute faster than I can climb up it. So I'd be exposed for less time. But it's a conversation that has to happen within your team, and you have to identify who's comfortable with what. We would not have been able to have that conversation without having made this plan. So, what are the key components of a plan? You need to have a route, you need to have decision points, and you need to continually communicate with the people on your team as you update your operating system with the conditions or the reality that is out there in the mountains. So I'm gonna give you some of the next steps, and then I'm gonna go into questions. So coming out of this class, this is a avalanche awareness intro to avalanche things. If you want to get into the backcountry, skiing, riding, snow machining, doing military things, step one is an intro to backcountry. That can be on a snow machine, on a snowmobile, that can be on skis or on snowboard or split board rather. You'll learn how to use the equipment there so that when you get to an avalanche level one, you can then just focus on learning that material and diving more into those avalanche problems I talked and the forecast and really getting hands on with that stuff. Then you have your avalanche rescue. Avalanche rescue is a great way to do a refresher or a way for a team to tune up before you go. I recommend taking the avalanche level one at in the zone that you're going to be skiing most. And then if you want to go into another region, that could be a time to take an avalanche level two with your team, where you now learn the problems that are in a different area. After the rescue, there's the mountain navigation course that I am going to be releasing in March. Avalanche Education does a great job of helping you understand the forecasting and the avalanche problems. The mountain navigation course is going to take the planning stuff and help you make a consistently solid plan every time so you can adapt with your team to the existing conditions. And that's coming out in March with both a free digital version and then a paid one that you can do analog and make your own plans. I'm going to on the top right, I'm going to continue talking about this stuff through both Instagram and through the Tactical Alpinism podcast. And then the final piece, and this is the most important one, is that bottom bit, which is go practice. If you're going to go into an area and you haven't done any route planning, go grab a screenshot of that example route I planned, put those components, a checkpoint, a route, an alternate route, a contingency route, and then go walk it. Have a GPS running, and then you can see how close did you actually get to following that track cross country that you thought you were walking once you upload it. Bonus credit if you do it 100% off trail, because that just makes it harder in general. So I'm going to stop the share and the slide. It's there, and I'll go into any questions that you may have. I'll start with the one that's in the chat. Yeah, so Eric Bird asked, I live in Bozeman, Montana. We almost always have a deep, persistent weak layer. I was wondering if you can extrapolate on that specific avalanche problem. So yeah, absolutely, Eric. So first, you want to look at the aspects and elevations that that problem exists at. You're going to have a few different things that create a persistent weak layer. You're going to have surface hoar, which if you have ever seen like the frost fingers of snow after a really cold night where it almost looks like feathers on top of the snow. And actually, I'll pull up an image of that. One sec. So I actually had a picture of some um, surface hoar in this image. If it'll present for us, there we go. So in this image right here on the left, that's a picture of surface hoar. So that's a weak layer. It kind of acts like dominoes or like champagne glasses, where it's like it's pretty strong if it's taken force down, but as soon as it tips, it breaks. So like think about tipping over a platter full of champagne glasses or a deck of cards or a card tower. Like as soon as you tip that over, it breaks. And so that's not a problem when it's on the surface of the snow. As soon as it gets buried and preserved, it is now a problem. So that's one of the persistent weak layer problems that you'll see. The other is what is called facets. And I'm not going to go into different snow types, but bottom line is facets are that sugary snow that you see that's like really light. It'll bounce. It makes when it'll bounce when it's in your hand and not make a snowball. It makes absolutely awful snowballs, doesn't stick together at all. Those are facets. When you get those that type of snow in the snow or down under layers, I should say, you're now going to have essentially ball bearings under the snowpack, and that'll turn into when it gets steep enough, just running downhill. The that type of problem, both the surface hoar and the facets, where you have deep persistent or persistent weak layers, can propagate really far to the point of where you can get what's called remote triggering, where I might be 200 meters away, and then that problem you might cause a failure in the snow. You'll hear that whoomph, and then 200 meters away, you see an avalanche, or you don't even see it because it's around the corner. So those problems you really have to what you have to pay attention to is the aspect at elevation that they're occurring at and that the forecast is calling for them in. If you have any doubts, just avoid it altogether. It's like you'll see it in Utah all the time. Like, yeah, anything persistent, be scared. And like that for I don't want y'all to take away the like be scared of avalanches from this. It's if you see persistent or you see glide or you see wet slab, be scared of those ones. Did I answer your question, Eric? And like this is a topic that like people get PhDs in. So there's a lot more information to it, but you can get a lot of information from your forecast center by tracking the conditions through a season. So from SJ, no dumb questions, only the ones you don't ask. Let's see. What are the different avalanche considerations during spring, summer when there is no snow or precipitation, but there is snow on the ground year round? I've only considered for winter conditions due to where I live. Yeah, so spring, you're going to get what's called a diurnal cycle where you're getting a lot of solar input during the day and you might get a refreeze at night. And it doesn't have to be below freezing for you to get a refreeze. You can get a refreeze from just radiative cooling. So there's a few different ways that the snow gains and loses heat. And so you can get that more cooling and get a freezing surface when it's 35 degrees out, when it's 37 degrees out, depending on the conditions. So in the spring, it becomes fairly consistent in most areas, not all, where you'll have just this warming and then cooling and warming and cooling. And as it warms and then refreezes, as it's warming, it gets weaker. You can get a wet loose more often than not if there is a persistent layer or some sort of smooth surface underneath. That's where you can get a wet slab, so say a smooth rock surface or a clear cut slope in a ski area. You'll actually see some ski areas where glide cracks will open, and that is not a glide avalanche. It is a like area where it's too it's not steep enough or not enough mass is there for the whole thing to slide, but you're starting to get some gliding in the snowpack. And that usually requires a smooth underlaying surface. So a like a granite rock face or slope. You could have glaciers. You'll see a lot of big glide avalanches in the Alps during the spring and summer. Maybe not a lot, but you'll see them. Um, so yeah, there's definitely like things to consider when you see warming in the summer with snow potentially moving. Did I answer your question, SJ? Awesome. So if there are any other questions that you want to ask, feel free to unmute and ask or toss them in the chat. I'll hang out for another few minutes, and then I'll end this thing no later than 4 minutes from now.
I have a question about like how you would look at entering ranges that are outside of a forecast area. There's the crazy mountains near where I'm at, and they're just outside the forecast area. And so, like, what education is like the Avi 2 maybe where I want to be at, or how
Yeah.
would you go about that?
Yeah. So as far as education, so within the US, you have recreational and professional level education. The recreational education is your rec level one, rec level two, and your avalanche rescue. Rec level one is intended to make you a contributor to a team. Rec level two is intended to make you a leader for a team. And then when we're talking pro one and pro two, there's two pro levels as well. Now we're looking at like operational risk management and forecasting. So when I go into a new zone, right, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just look at the weather for the past month. Like, what are the temperature trends? What was the snowfall? I'm going to see if there are any weather stations in the area that I can pull that data from. If you go to CalTopo, is one of the mapping apps, and that's something that I can show you how to do another time. It's you can actually pull up where weather stations are and look at what the weather they're reporting is through CalTopo or through different apps that have weather stations you can access. Um, so first, historic weather. Second is like, what's the forecast? What's it looking like? It's going to do? Is there going to be more snow coming in? Is it just going to be warming and cooling? Is it going to be predictable or is it going to be uncertain? The more uncertainty we have about what conditions are doing, the more of a margin we need to make. And then it's going to be like, let's go check what that forecast and that historics are actually doing when we get there. So that's going to be where, and I hesitate to say this because they're a double-edged sword. That's where we're going to go dig a snow pit and see like what the layers actually look like. And the reason I say it's a double-edged sword is because snow pits are used either to profile the snow or to say no. A snow pit can never lead you to say yes because if we're thinking like scientific data, one snow pit is a single data point in the snow and their user error has a lot of impact on if you've ever done like any chemistry like in high school or whatever like user error creates a lot of problems and so like one snow pit in the snow is not enough. It's the forecasters have hundreds if not thousands of observations that they build a forecast off of. So if you're there for a week, now we're going to start to build certainty in what that looks like as we see how conditions are developing. Maybe we dig a pit every day. Maybe we're looking at things on the surface of the snow and seeing how those problems develop. We're looking to close our uncertainty. But that is something that you get into in the Avalanche level 2 recreational course quite a bit more. And that's why I recommend doing it in terrain that is not what you're familiar with. So you're showing up not understanding the problems.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally. Any other questions before I close this thing out? All right, SJ. Previously used FatMap in trip route planning and found the slope angle tool useful. Do I have any recommendations for replacement? So my go-to for all mapping is CalTopo, CalTopo. Um, I will actually, what I can do is if you shoot me an email saying you want it, I can give you a 30-day trial on their mobile app. Nothing comes back to me. It's just the app I use. It's for planning, it's a lot more user friendly to do it on the desktop and then follow it using the mobile. It works really well on the mobile phone once you've actually done the planning on the desktop or on a computer. And yes, it is international. They have imagery, they have different mapping layers. So you'll have to play with the different layers in your zone, SJ, to identify which ones are going to be the ones that work best for you. And In March, I'm like one of those courses that I'm releasing is a free like how to use your digital mapping apps. So just be on the lookout for that free course coming out in early March. You guys will be on the email list because you signed up for this, so you'll know when that comes out too. Cool. I'll stick around for a little bit more if there are any other questions. Otherwise, thanks y'all for joining. Appreciate it, and I'll send out the recording not tonight, but in a day or two. Have a good one, y'all.